The September 6, 2016 work session of the Williamsburg City Council will come to order. Ms. Walton, would you call the roll, please?
Mr. Zhang?
Here.
Mr. Pons?
Here.
Mayor Freiling?
Here.
Vice Mayor Foster?
Here.
Ms. Ramsey?
Here. Items for the City Council meeting of September 8th, City Council preview. Are there any questions? Or Mr. Collins, do you have anything you'd like to share with Council?
I'd just remind that City Council will be considering a public hearing for a long-term special event license agreement, a request of Colonial Williamsburg Foundation for operation of an ice rink on Duke of Gloucester Street. In addition, Council will review the legislative agenda for the 2007 General Assembly, starting that process for eventual adoption in November. The Council will review demolition, award a bid for the Super 8 Motel on Richmond Road, property acquired by the city. In addition, the Council will consider the Middle Peninsula Juvenile Detention Commission Service Agreement amendments to proposed resolutions. In the City Attorney's report, there's a bank-qualified tax-exempt financing action and a property tax exemption to bring City Code up to compliance with state statute from action. I'd also like to take just a moment and recognize Andrew Trivett, who has joined the city as the Assistant City Manager, this being the first formal meeting that he's in attendance with City Council. I'd like to take that opportunity to recognize Mr. Trivett and welcome him to the City Manager's staff.
Welcome, Andrew. We look forward to having the opportunity to work with you quite a bit coming up. Any questions for Mr. Collins? This is time when we take public comment on any of the matters that City Council will be considering at the Thursday meeting. Anybody would like to share a few words? Please come forward. Seeing none, that will take us to background presentations and discussions. We have 4 today. The first is the Virginia Arts Festival update with Executive Director Rob Cross and General Manager Scott Jackson. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Mayor Freiling, ladies and gentlemen, Council and City Manager. Thank you for giving us this opportunity to give you an update of this past season and a little preview of next year. As many of you will remember, this past season was the Virginia Arts Festival's 20th season celebration. We approached the city about a year ago to ask the city if they would help us try to ramp up the festival for our 20th season celebration. If there are ways to re-energize and maybe look at a different direction for what we were doing as part of Festival Williamsburg. So it's my pleasure now to kind of give you an update of what happened this past year. And as you remember, we were 4 days in this beautiful spot here in front of the museum. We opened on Thursday night with Bruce Hornsby doing a solo concert, which was a benefit concert for the Habitat for Humanity, Williamsburg Shakespeare Festival, and the Virginia Arts Festival's Education Outreach Program. Then we moved into the tent for Friday, Saturday, and Sunday night. We had 2 bands on Friday, 4 on Saturday, and 4 on Sunday. I'll give you a little bit of revenue report. We had ticket sales of slightly under $300,000 this year for the Funhouse Fest. Food and beverage sales of over $45,000. We had some VIP tent sponsorship of $10,000, and we had funding from the City of Williamsburg and the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation of $145,000 for total revenue of $500,000. Our expenses for this first year were $611,000, and you can see the breakdown here. No big surprises for a first-year event, and obviously the festival was able to subsidize these losses out of our additional fundraising and out of our general operating budget. Attendance obviously was dramatically increased, being able to move to a larger venue. I thought it would be good to give you some context, so if you can see where we've been for the last couple of years. Back when we were at the Virginia, over in the Lodge, in the Virginia room. So 2014, our total ticket sales were 2,100. We were at 1,700 in 2015. And this past year, we were at 7,200. And that also, as it does in all 3 years, includes the concerts we did at Williamsburg Winery. And I know near and dear to everyone's heart here is the tourism part of the festival. And through zip codes, we're able to track where ticket buyers are coming from. So of our 7,200 ticket sales, we can document that 2,200 of those were for out of market, which means about 31% of our attendees this year for the Funhouse Fest for out-of-town visitors. And we know they came from 27 states, Washington, D.C., and 2 foreign countries. And we were able to break that down a little bit further by state. And obviously, even in-market visitation is essential for filling up hotel rooms, so we thought we'd kind of give you where they're coming from in Virginia. We have hard copies of this report if you want to spend more time with it a little bit later. And using what we think are conservative numbers, we think the economic impact and the spend that week was about $484,000 for the Festival of Williamsburg weekend this year. And here's a quick overview of our marketing plan. This was the in-market plan for when we went on sale in that 2-week period in March when we announced the artist lineup. Then a little more detailed as we moved into the festival through March 13, all the way running through the festival. The marketing plan, the marketing initiative was definitely a partnership with the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation, and taking the lead was GWCTA. We pooled our marketing dollars so we'd have more impact with our budget, and they did most of the placement of the advertising. In market was some of our more traditional advertising, and I would say the major initiative for out of market was digital and social media and radio. And some more details. As for arts in general, and I think in marketing in general, and specifically to more popular entertainment, social media becomes a much more valuable and efficient way to reach people. The festival is getting more sophisticated, and again, Karen's team led this effort. Here's some examples of some of the print pieces that were used in direct mail, newspaper. And we had fantastic coverage both locally and out of market for the festival. Both the local newspapers and obviously reaching out to Richmond and then the Mid-Atlantic area. There was a lot of coverage in the kind of the rock and roll jazz world, a lot of the online publications. And this is a good chart of our kind of the gross impressions that we were getting running up to the festival. Again, we were able to track these from back-end analysis, and about first month there in March, we were at over 41 million gross impressions, and you can see how that tracked. And then there was obviously some follow-up that in July after the festival was over. Sorry, 141 million. So my old eyes are not good at reading that. So I'm going to invite Scott Jackson, who's the general manager of the festival, to say a few words. Education is a big part of the festival, and that's obviously some of the funding from the Colonial Williamsburg, our city of Williamsburg, was used to support our education effort. Scott?
Yeah, we're focused today on Funhouse Fest, and we were excited about it, but I wanted to remind you that for a long time you've also supported our real focus on arts education, and we believe if you want to have a world-class performing arts festival, it should make a difference for students. So you really led the way. Every single student for 10 years that's gone through Williamsburg, James City County schools has an opportunity to either attend a festival event or has had an artist come into their school. And that's pretty incredible. So every single student graduating is having that as part of their experience. Last year, all of your 5th graders attended the Virginia International Tattoo. That was 877 students saw that event. And then we had a number of in-school events. One of the most exciting, the Dance Theater of Harlem came into your Matthew Whaley Elementary and taught a master class for more than 450 students took part. And we're really proud of that and appreciate your vision not only to support the tourism aspect of the festival, but also the arts education aspect, because we believe ultimately that's our future audience, that's our future people taking part in the arts, and it's really important. That's part of what we leave behind.
So moving forward, we feel we're very excited. We thought it was a great success this year for the first year down this path. We're meeting with all of our team members and partners had a great meeting with Colonial Williamsburg Foundation. We're meeting with Bruce Hornsby's team, both his publicist and his manager, and obviously meeting with city officials and with the Visitors Convention Bureau. But our goal is to be able to repeat this event next year. We'll obviously be looking for ways to tweak it. I think we have lots of lessons learned in addition to the great successes we had. We're focusing on that same weekend, which is that last full weekend in June, and figuring out what's the right size, how many performances, how many artists for each day. So we look forward to continuing the conversation and coming back to the city and seeing how the partnership will work. And I know I want to thank you specifically for the funding you gave us this past year, our general operating funding, and also the extra support you gave us specifically for our 20th season celebration and for Funhouse Fest. And I think Scott's going to say a few words about how we want to move forward for funding for next year.
Sure, thanks. So again, thank you very much. The city gave us a special grant that if it really weren't for the leadership of the city, Funhouse Fest would not have happened. So thank you. It was really important to get that commitment early on because ticket sales aren't going to come in for a very long time. We would like you to consider a special request for this year to help us with growing Funhouse Fest. Last year, your special funding was in the amount of $50,000, but we believe we can increase our revenue, we can increase our attendance, we think we can do more with local food and beverage. We think there's things we can do to make up a lot of that money, but we'd like you to consider a special request of $25,000. That would go specifically towards the Funhouse Fest, all of the things that go along with it. Again, we really appreciate that funding. Last year, we believe that we can grow the festival in a way that the city can reduce the support, but that support's still very important to us and committing to the festival for this coming year.
Thank you. Do we have questions? Mr. Cross or Mr. Jackson?
Questions. I was there every day for the Funhouse Fest and had a blast. And so neat to walk past that stage and tent, having driven up and down Francis Street, not daily, weekly. Never imagined that space could transform in that way. It was a really special moment for Williamsburg. So glad to hear that efforts are being put forth to make it happen again in a bigger and better way.
Well, and the only thing I would add to that, too, because I was there every night and Thursday night, was that people were hitting each other and saying, can you believe we're in Williamsburg, that this is happening here? And I think that was what was really neat about the event, and for those people who came to Williamsburg to recognize that that type of event can occur here with the promise of more and better things to occur in the future.
Yeah, I agree. I didn't make it every night, but I did go by at least one night. It was quite an impressive undertaking when you think of the closing of the street right there in front of the Waltz Gallery. That's unheard of, and so it was kind of exciting to see that, and then to have all the people participating in the audience and the bands was really a good thing. And the intangible of the benefit of this is intangible. I mean, how do you know, all the other things that the community got from this, other than look at the money and say, oh, well, you lost $100,000. But was there other spending? Was there other residual benefits that come along with this? Did people come here for this event and then want to come back to Williamsburg and take in some other things? So having lost that money, or having run the deficit, maybe is a better way to put it, it's not a scary thing for me. It certainly doesn't impede my ability or desire to want to see to it that we do all we can to make sure that it happens again next year. So I'm excited about it. And this event type of activity is really kind of the next one of the next tourism generators that we have. We're world renowned for arts, or for colonial America, history, Busch Gardens, and things of that nature. And so evolving into an events arts culture has kind of been our target for some time now, and this was a big jump into that foray, so I look forward to it.
Just wanted to echo everything that's been said already, especially particularly Ms. Ramsey's point about how, speaking to some people there, that it was so cool to see that they were remarking like, oh, this happened here in Williamsburg. That's, I think, again, I do share the same kind of good feeling generally from hearing that as well. Just want to also commend you guys for broadening your vision as well and looking into your investment on the arts education and the educational outreach stuff. I think that's a really cool aspect of what you guys done, and not just focus on the tourism generator with the event as well, but really broadening that vision and idea. So thank you.
Thank you.
So you referenced lessons learned. Could you share a few? What were some of either the biggest lessons that you learned or things that perhaps surprised you along the way?
Oh, boy.
Besides how great it was to be in downtown.
No, I'd say some things were simpler than we expected. And I'm speaking from my perspective, but I'm sure that fire and police would weigh in. But moving people around the city, we got very little negative feedback in terms of satellite parking, satellite transportation. I think for us, for the festival, working with Karen's team, I think learning when to advertise, because we tend for a lot of the traditional arts to advertise way far in advance, and we're finding that people are making later decisions. So it's knowing when to spend the marketing dollars to get the best return on investment. And then definitely some ways to orient the park in terms of backstage area, where the barrier needs to be, in terms of someone from one of the city staff made the comment, people are used to seeing things for free around here. And if we're going to ticket an event, we need to make sure that we're gating it so people can't freeload. I'm paraphrasing. So I think where we put barriers and traffic flow, I think we can tweak that.
I think also food and beverage was a big thing. We were doing this the first time. We just didn't have enough food and beverage, particularly on Saturday night. We had such a great crowd. People were having to wait a long time. We had a VIP area that worked very nicely, but we want to make everyone feel like they're having a VIP experience. And also there's a big movement to buy local, eat local, drink local. I think we need to get more local vendors involved. And again, that's just a question of being able to present them a track record that they can be confident that it's worth their time to come out. So I think one of our priorities next year is to expand that, make it more organized, but also have more local involvement, particularly from Williamsburg businesses, because I think that's what people want. It will add to that great Williamsburg experience to not only be here at this event in this area, but also be eating, food from the area and drinking from the area. So that's definitely something we want to improve upon. People really want not just a concert, but they want an experience, and I think we need to expand on that experience for folks. That it's more, whether it's not just that I saw a great show, but I had a great time. I was part of a great atmosphere. And that's the way we are moving in the entertainment world throughout the country. That's what we're focusing on, is the experience.
So you've had decades of experience in conducting events large and small. I think it's fair to say this is an unusual occurrence for the city to have something of this scope spreading over 4 nights, all with a common theme. And the Arts Festival of Williamsburg has been here, as you said, for 20 years, but it's not quite been as cohesive in major production as this. And Saturday night alone, you sold more tickets than you have in past entire weekends. How do you compare this with the other larger events that you've done in the other communities?
Well, the best comparisons are when we have a major dance company in Chrysler Hall, where, let's say it's Birmingham Royal Ballet or American Ballet Theater, and they're there for a whole week. That's a major budget, major number of tickets. And the other would be the Tattoo, which we produce every year in scope. And it's definitely of approaching that size of something like the Tattoo in terms of potential box office potential and number of artists and moving people around. And obviously, the big difference here, Scott and I were talking about earlier today, is, and the city faces this all the time, is we have to create the venue. So we go into the event with that fixed expense of having to bring in the tent, chairs, stage, sound, and lights. And we know that, and we have to budget for it, but that makes it an added challenge.
But I would say it was a home run.
Yeah.
I mean, for example, one of the people we reached out to, because this was such a big event for us, was someone named Rudy Schlegel, that for many years ran Chastain Park for the Atlanta Symphony in Atlanta. He lives in Los Angeles now. He's worked for 40 years in the entertainment world, produced big events. He was blown away. He said, this is a fantastic spot. This is a great event. Like, Rudy couldn't wait to talk to us about, I have ideas for next year. So I think on every level, this was just a perfect fit. And we had high expectations and it exceeded them. It was just a great event, you know. You all mentioned being on that spot, you had to pinch yourself to try to imagine, what did this look like before? I can't remember this. It was terrific.
And if I can just share a couple of observations. The thing that I heard over and over again from people in the community was extremely positive feedback about the event. Their enthusiasm for it, as Ms. Ramsey and Mr. Zhang have referenced. Are we in Williamsburg and this is happening? So not only are the local people feeling that, but the visitors who are coming to this community are also getting an exceptional experience. I was not there all 3 nights like Mr. Foster. I could only make it to one, but I live across the street. And I can tell you that the inconvenience, noise issues, anything non-existent from our perspective. It was incredibly well handled thanks to city staff and Arts Festival coming together to do a lot of advanced planning. And it's also an important time to support tourism. I think Mr. Pons would attest to that's a soft time. And to have a signature event like that in an increasingly difficult summer period is something that's critically important to us. We do a lot of little things. We support a lot of small, really important, homegrown, community, arts-oriented programs. This is one big splash that we have that I believe has the opportunity time, if it makes sense for us to continue to support this, to become branded with the Williamsburg community as an event that has an identity unto itself and becomes significant enough that it brings people from a much larger distance. Again, assuming we can keep it all going. It supports our vision of downtown vibrancy. I mean, this is a key component of what council has been talking about and what we've been searching for years. And so it's exciting to see something come together like this. So one thing I might suggest that you look at is how, not only through the marketing, but during the event, do we cross-market other opportunities that people have in Williamsburg going forwards? And one that immediately comes to mind is Mr. Jackson was mentioning the increased presence of local beverage providers and local food purveyors, is what are we going to be doing to promote the Williamsburg Tasting Trail or other tourist-oriented, guest-oriented programs that might be of interest to the captive audience? And how do we take advantage of that infrastructure that's there? So we make that significant investment. How do we leverage that into a bigger, greater experience for our guests? So we appreciate your request, informal as it may be at this moment. You know that you're aware of the process. If you could work with Mr. Collins on submitting that, and do you have something to share there? Reaching for a button of some sort. To work through that process, we have criteria that have to be met as such a request is considered. We'd like to do what we can to partner again, but we also need for you to be able to meet those criteria.
Great.
So, any other questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for your time.
This takes us to our second background presentation and discussion with the Greater Williamsburg Chamber and Tourism Alliance Quarterly Tourism Update. With us today, we have President and CEO Karen Reardon. Welcome.
Good afternoon, Mayor Freilich and City Council. I want to first start, this is our work session to give you a tourism update with statistics that will go through June. So speaking of June and just trying to comment a bit on the presentation that you just saw. Again, we were proud to work closely with Rob and his team at Virginia Arts Festival to take a look at Funhouse Fest. As you heard from Rob and Scott, this was an endeavor that involved many people in the city staff, our fire, police, many people at Colonial Williamsburg. The Tourism Alliance's role was small, but we are proud of the fact that we were early to endorse and to help really be an influencer and really work closely with the entire Virginia Arts Festival team. So to your point, Mayor Freilich, we already do have a sub-brand. This festival has always been called Festival Williamsburg, and I think this year Funhouse Fest really sort of lived up to the potential, and I think there's great future potential to keep growing this particular type of festival. And so we have talked about some things. We were very strategic and deliberate about the time of year that we did choose for this past year. Just to remind Council, this festival, Williamsburg, used to happen in May. And we worked closely, again, with Rob's team to look at the data. And Colonial Williamsburg was also part of that decision-making process and determined that putting this festival in June would be a good thing for the city and it would be a good thing for the destination. So I'm pleased to see that that was the case with, I think, even better than expected attendance. And again, many lessons on the marketing front as well that we can take, little things, just not even about timing and sequencing, but also about the product and how we're going to continue to shape that. But like you all, what we're really pleased about is that we're starting to build an arts identity for Williamsburg, and that's exactly why we have been such big proponents of the fall arts and the spring arts, and now this. If you recall, last year, the Alliance worked on Summer of Freedom, which was the name of our campaign, to do a small effort at Lake Matoka, again, with the wonderful cooperation of the College of William and Mary. But what lesson we learned was that that was a very, very heavy lift in that time of year. It was end of July when the stadium was available, and we felt this was a much better use of our resources to go in with Funhouse Fest to support that marketing and be able to purchase that marketing. So again, some of the things that we're learning is that some of our strength is in marketing and promotion and communicating everything that Williamsburg has to offer, as opposed to being in the producer role. And so I think this is a really good example of letting Virginia Arts Festival do what it does best, which is produce, and has been doing so for 20 years, and allowing us to help contribute to the marketing and the communication of that. I also just wanted to take a moment as we go into fall and then the statistics and the scorecard to address a little bit about the summer season. Technically, the Tourism Alliance does not spend any of its $2 million in the summer season from a campaign perspective. We are part of WADMAC. As you know, we serve as the fiscal agent for WADMAC, and so it's really the WADMAC summer seasonal marketing campaign that's approved each year in December that does the marketing from March all the way through the end of August. So we've actually just sort of finished the summer season. With that being said, again, our finances are constrained to the funds that we collect through the flat $2 tax, both here in the city as well as in James City County and York County. So last December, when we looked at that plan, we did make some running adjustments and changes from the year before to try to, again, move more digital, to do more in social media, more in public relations with the new firm, trying to optimize and adjust and flex the schedule as much as we can. So we do not have the data yet for July and August. You're going to see the scorecard in a few minutes that will show you through June. But I think it's no surprise to you all that we know the volume was down for a number of different reasons, and summer was not what we were hoping it would be, or frankly, beyond hoping, what we were planning for it to be. And so one of the things we have tried to do through WADMAC and with our own efforts of the Tourism Alliance is adjust the marketing as much as we can in July, and then in August with the summer campaigns that we did, specifically targeting those markets that tend to like to come to this area at this time of year. So I think you probably noticed, like I did, lots of Pennsylvania license plates, lots of New Jersey license plates. They tend to have a school start that is today, September 6th, right after Labor Day, and they tend to be some of our strongest visitors for August. So we did try to do what we could to continue to pump up the volume of visitation for the month of August, and to some degree also July. But we're not anticipating, when you see those numbers in a few months, that our summer will be nearly as strong as it was for the summer of 2015. I do want to talk about fall arts because we are actually already in it. Summer, I guess, technically doesn't end until September 21, but in our world, we've already planned through Christmas, and we've already launched fall arts. As you know, the official first event was at Lake Matoka last week with the Virginia Symphony Orchestra playing, and then we had a couple of things that canceled this weekend due to the promise of a storm that wasn't as severe, thankfully, as had been predicted, but we are already into the height of our marketing for fall arts. So to the left, what you see on your screen is some of the advertising creative that has been produced this year. Again, very heavy digital with a lot of banners, using Pandora again, which has been effective for us at the Christmas time, but also doing some sponsorships in some of our radio stations. Popular one in Washington, D.C. is WAMU, which is American University Radio, and then a lot in the earned media and in the social media phase. So that campaign kicked off the second week of August, and it will go all the way through Columbus Day weekend as we kind of finish up fall arts. We take a half of a second, and then we move right into harvest celebration and Christmas. These are just two examples of some of the earned media. This one, not only was the ad, well placed in the magazine, but it actually is connected to a major feature story on Colonial Williamsburg. So that was great editorial coverage as well as advertising coverage for us. And the Richmond market, which again tends to be a very strong market for us for fall arts. And this is something else I wanted to make you aware of. This is a new piece that we just created in the marketing department at the Alliance. This is our arts rack brochure, and we created a lot of these, thousands and thousands, so that they can go into all of the visitor centers. As you may know, we had over 7,000 visitors who stop at the East Coast Gateway pretty much every day, and particularly this time of year. So as they're passing through, coming down to the peninsula, we wanted to have this piece in their hand as well as the visitor guide and some of the other general brochures, but this one was created specifically for the arts, and we created it as a little bit more of as an evergreen piece so that we could use it this fall for fall arts, but that we can use it again in the spring for spring arts. So hence the slightly different color palette and the name being the fall arts brochure. And what you're seeing here again is not enough real estate to list every single event that we have going on, since there's over 100, but a very, very strong call to action to get people to the website where they can click and look at every single event, see the time, see the date, and get a little synopsis of what that event is. So again, pushing very, very heavily with some new marketing materials there. Mayor Freiling, you mentioned a couple of minutes ago the tasting trail. This has been another major endeavor. We have been working very closely with all of the producers and all of the partners of the Williamsburg Tasting Trail, and then we worked with our marketing team, our agency, to create this new collateral piece, like the arts brochure. This is brand spanking new, hot off the presses, and again has a really nice bio on each Tasting Trail partner and a strong call to action with a new website page that's now live, so people can go onto an interactive map, they can click, they can see where the Copper Fox Distillery is, then they can pop over and see where Silver Hand Meadery is, and then go over to Virginia Beer or Ale Works, Brass Cannon, Williamsburg Winery. So all of the partners are there, from the distillers to the meadery to the winery and the Colonial Wine partners, and of course our three craft beer companies. So again, this has been a really wonderful collaboration, came together very quickly as all these pieces have been being built together on the product that is the Tasting Trail over the last 15 months. We saw that this was a really great opportunity to start marketing this very, very aggressively. And again, visitors are already asking about it. We were at the orientation for William and Mary families on August 19th, and as many sad moms and dads as I met that day, I also saw many happy moms and dads who were picking up this brochure, asking me if it was open and if they could go try it that very day. So again, I think we're giving our consumer, our visitors, and our locals something new to do, and they're very, very excited about that. Harvest celebration is going to be a lot bigger and a lot longer than it was last year in our inaugural effort. So it will be November 4th through 13, a full 10 days. Right now we already have over 30 events, and there's about 7 more that are getting ready to be added to the website. But this is up and live now, and people are able to go on, click on by day, and see the different events and start to think about what they would like to visit and what ones they would like to purchase tickets for. And once again, we're targeting food and beverage enthusiasts in the Mid-Atlantic. The buzz coming off of last year's event means that we have more national press willing to come down this year and witness it, see it, taste it, experience it, and write about it, which is great. But we also have quite a few people who came last year that are already inquiring and are planning to come again. So we see this as being an effort that will go north, probably as far north as New York in terms of our reach, and back into the Carolinas again. We did get some nice visitation from the Outer Banks last year, and we expect to see nice visitation from the Raleigh-Durham area again this year. So we are already working on all of that to have that marketing up and running. We just don't want it to step over the Williamsburg Fall Arts marketing right now. So we're just kind of tag teaming those two events before we move right into Christmas marketing. So this is by far our heaviest season in terms of getting all of these ducks lined up in a row to get them ready to roll for the fall and into the winter. And this is the scorecard. I'm actually going to show you two. The first is just the City of Williamsburg scorecard. This is the same scorecard that we've been using now for a little over a year, I think 15 months. I just want to point out that the total tourism expenditures is still the 2014 data. Unfortunately, there's about an 18-month lag before we see the 2015 data. So the Virginia Tourism Corp promises me that we should have that in about a month. So in October, we will see that data set. You'll see when you look at the full region that last year we were up year over year about 3%, which was a very big jump. We're not expecting to see that same increase year over year that we had for 13 into 14. But if we then start to look at the municipal data that we receive and put together to create the scorecard, you'll see that the number of hotel rooms that we have in the city have actually decreased just a little bit by 21 rooms. The same with our B&Bs. So we have a negative 25 total rooms that we would be able to sell in the city of Williamsburg for our lodging stock, but we still reside at about 3,800 rooms on any given day that are in the city proper for sale. So right now, the number of occupied hotels, B&Bs, and timeshares in the city through June is down negative 2.3%. Timeshare rentals is something that I would love to continue to work with council on. We'd love to see as our timeshare units are right now are stable at 213, but as that starts to shift and we anticipate that there will be more timeshare units in the city going forward, we'd love to be able to work with the city collaboratively to be able to get a hold of a data set so that we can understand again how many timeshare rentals we actually have in the city of Williamsburg. We're able to get that data from James City County and New York now, and part of that is they just have a much larger percentage of timeshare rooms. So I think in the past, because we are such a small data set at 213 rooms, we haven't been able to do that. So hopefully that's something we can work on together in 2016, 2017. Room night demand growth, like number of occupied rooms, is also down negative 2.3%. Room sales down accordingly, negative 2.2%, and the tax that goes with that. The average daily rate, which again is calculated really looking at all the rates across the lodging stock that's available, has actually crept up a little bit here in the city, and you'll see likewise it has in the region. So it's now just a little over $111 as the ADR. Meals tax is at positive 0.9%, just under 1%, and retail sales tax data is always a little bit slower than the hotel and restaurants. So this data is through May, and that right now for the city is at a negative 5.6%. I'd like to have you then take a look at the city, which is in the first column. Same exact data set, same business metrics, but you can see now the full picture when it's put up in comparison to James City County, York County, and then the whole Williamsburg region. And again, you'll see that James City County and York has some slightly different statistics and dynamics going on in terms of their hotel stock and their timeshare stock, which is actually good for our destination because it's pulling the metrics up overall. So the only metrics that are down on the regional scorecard are actually inventory, where again the city as well as James City County and York have had some reduction in the number of lodging inventory, and so those metrics are down. But the metrics for Room night demand growth is up slightly at 0.8%. Room sales up 3.9%, as well as sales tax. And you can see the average daily rate. Williamsburg is still a little bit behind. James City County is at $116 for the average daily rate, and York continues to lead with a lot of the stock that they have on Bypass Road, bringing in a much higher average daily rate at $133. But that is pulling the overall score for the region up. Meals tax, again, is up 2.9%, and right now retail sales tax, even though it's down in the city, is up slightly in York and James City County. Therefore, we're actually at no change. So it's sort of a flat score there in terms of retail sales tax. So this is a different picture than what we had seen when we looked at data sets earlier in the year, where we're seeing that right now the number of occupied hotels, the room night demand growth, as well as room sales tax and meals tax has slowed down, and it's not growing and it's not increasing at the rate it had been when I reported to you earlier in the spring, and we were looking at a data set that was through March at that point. So with that, I will put this back and take any questions that you may have on my report.
Mr. Foster?
And I understand the distinction. Our efforts, chamber, to promote the shoulder seasons, and can you summarize a little bit what you anticipate doing different on the WADMAC side next year to hopefully turn some of these arrows green?
You will be joining us on that board. That board, again, is comprised of representative from the city, York, and James City County, myself, Ms. Rita McClenny, the president of Virginia Tourism Corporation, representative from JYF. So we have just completed a major offsite to kick off planning for next year. And so we are looking at these stats as well as the marketing metrics that WADMAC has in terms of how many people are coming to the website, what they're doing there, what the level of engagement is like. And we're trying to right now formulate the new plan for 2017. Right now we're still just about 18, 20 months into a new campaign, with that campaign really being all about some of the things that the Virginia Arts Festival accomplished. We want to be broadening the perspective of the visitor about what Williamsburg is. We want them to know about us in terms of food and beverage. We want them to know about arts. We want them to know about outdoor recreation and sports. And so we're doing that in addition to having them still understand that this is a bedrock place, probably one of the most unique places in the country, if not in the world, in regard to American history, with, of course, Colonial Williamsburg, Jamestown, and Yorktown. And so that's a different story than what we had been telling for many years. And so we're still really trying to use our funds to find the best way to get that story out so people understand everything we have to offer. So we're really pushing for dynamism, for freshness. We want families to still consider that's still our core primary audience. But one thing that we have been doing is we've been looking and are considering for 2017 on the WADMAC board, putting a little bit more emphasis on couples, both young professionals, but also our retired couples, because they can come in September when the kids are back to school. They can come in March. They can come at different times of year. So that has not always been the way WADMAC has approached that marketing budget, but we are looking at ways that we can highlight more of our tasting trail, our culinary, and some of these other things in addition to our historical sites to see if we can overcome the number one barrier that we still have, which is, oh yes, love Williamsburg, been there, did it, I don't need to come again. That's still a major, major roadblock that we experience as a destination. So that's why, again, these music festivals, food festivals are so important. When people start to pinch themselves and think that they could be in Asheville when they're actually in Williamsburg, then we know we're onto something right, because that's exactly what we want them feeling, is that it's never the same place twice. So we have some more work we need to do with WADMAC, and we continue to have more work to do with the Tourism Alliance, taking relatively small amount of money, especially when you look at the media buy, and making sure that we're putting it in the right places at the right time. As Rob Cross mentioned earlier, the booking window keeps getting narrower and narrower, and the same with the marketing window. You can no longer market something in October that's for next March, because it's out of sight, out of mind. So there needs to be some way to get the word out and have them save dates and sort of register and dream about it and plan about it. But then there has to be something that creates a lot of urgency right before that month's event, or we've lost them. And so getting that balance is very tricky. It's part science and it's part art, trying to get that to work. But we're committed to continuing to do that. So we think overall the marketing strategy is the right approach globally, but it's all about getting it orchestrated perfectly so that we get the marketing metrics we're looking for and we get better business metrics in the scorecard.
Well, you mentioned the roadblock for Williamsburg. I've been there, done that. But I think another thing that we can never control is the weather.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, with people booking out shorter time periods, it also creates a challenge because they can look on a website and say, oh, it's going to be 100 degrees next week, so we're not going to Williamsburg. And so I think all of the efforts for the shoulder season really make a lot of sense. And I was curious, other than food and beverage and arts, what do you see as the upcoming trends that people are looking for?
Well, the other major focus is on just outdoor recreation. So again, the efforts the city has made around cycling, being a bicycle-friendly city, hiking, walking about, being able to paddleboard on the rivers, to be able to rent a canoe. Not every family takes advantage of that, but they like seeing that it's available and it's an option for them. So they may not do that their first trip, because their first trip might be very much consumed with going to see Colonial Williamsburg and getting down to Jamestown and going to Yorktown, but those we're seeing are very, very important, and it's what a lot of other destinations have highlighted. We have a lot of natural beauty here. We have a lot of those natural assets. We haven't always brought those to the forefront. So we believe there's a big opportunity to be pushing outdoor recreation, particularly now with the Capitol Trail finished. We've just kind of scratched the surface on what we can do there. You don't have to be a triathlete or a marathoner to cycle the Capitol Trail, which is great. And I think that we can be getting much more recreational enthusiasts, and that will also help us with our Sports Williamsburg endeavors at the Tourism Alliance, because if we're known as a sports place, when we can also do additional activities directly to coaches, rights holders, events holders, to try to persuade them to come and hold their tournaments here. Those two things go hand in hand. They want a nice place to come, but they also want to kind of feel that they're at a place where sports is important. Supported, exactly. So those two things do go hand in hand. And you're absolutely correct about the weather situation. It's not an excuse, but I've been looking at a lot of reports and talking to our peers up and down the Mid-Atlantic, and one of the things that many of us in this business, in the tourism business, have come to see is that we're particularly vulnerable being a drive market as it relates to weather. So as someone explained to me, if you're running the CVB of Orlando and the family has already plunked down non-refundable airline tickets to fly to Orlando, even if it's 99 degrees, they're going to go, because they're not going to just forfeit that money. But because we're 99% drive, people can indeed look at their mobile app, see that the weather says, wow, it's going to be really hot, or wow, there's going to be this tropical storm that comes through. That didn't. But that really had a chilling effect on even this weekend, is a perfect example. It was gorgeous by 2 o'clock on Saturday, but most people who were looking at us on Wednesday or Thursday of last week thought, well, we need to stay away from Williamsburg. So that is something that we'll need to continue to work through to figure out what are we doing with airlift, to see if we can get more airline here, if we can get more train here, if we can get other kinds of travelers, in addition to still being a strong drive market. We're never going to change that, but if we could change it a little bit, that could help us, because we tend to be in that 300-mile radius where people can just say, oh, we'll wait and do that another weekend. We don't have to go this week. The weather doesn't look good. So again, not a lot we can do there, but be aware of it and start to plan accordingly.
Well, following up on Ms. Ramsey's comment about weather and your response, we as a populace are becoming ever more sensitive to the environment. We don't like to be outside when it's too hot or too cold, and we want it just perfect. We want 72 and breezy every day. And so weather is a challenge, there's no question.
Yes.
But then that leads us, and you talked about sports, but then that leads me to where are we in the discussion, or where are we, you at the Alliance, in the discussion about an indoor sports facility? Sports is one of the low-hanging fruits, I think. It's a great opportunity. And we have lots of outdoor venues, but we don't have those indoor venues.
Certainly, if we could find the right combination of public-private investment, the Alliance continues to be in support of an indoor facility. With that being said, given the economic times that we're in, to date, there has not really been a private investor who's been interested in building the kind of indoor facility that we would like for sports like basketball, wrestling, gymnastics, cheerleading, the list goes on. So we've been working with a consultant from George Washington University who's a preeminent sports marketing professor, and she is really taking a look at how we can maximize the outdoor venues that we do have now and how we would market ourselves, thinking that at least for the short term, and by that I mean the next 24 months or so, we would remain an outdoor venue sporting community. And so what would that look like? And so we're hoping to get that final report the end of this month, the end of September, so that we can really dig into that and understand what our opportunities are, and then continue to look to see and work with governments to see if there's an opportunity to do something that would be helpful for the entire community, where we could build that indoor sports facility like other destinations have done. So I think that there's still lots of opportunity in the outdoor side, but you're absolutely right. If we want to grow it at a larger scale, we're going to need that indoor facility. Even if we had an agreement today, it would still be a couple of years away before it's built and operational. So we need to be just thinking about how we would have our entire plan in place to be marketing ourselves as a sporting community. So I think, again, some of the things we're doing in outdoor recreation kind of go hand in hand with what we can do to keep building up Sports Williamsburg. So I'm very eager to get her report and then start to dig into that and see what are some of the immediate action items that we can take in 2017 to do that.
Can you dig down into the discrepancy between what's happening in James City County and the city versus York County? I think that you'll find that trend probably continued through the summer. I'll leave it at that.
You want to help us? Is it room night demand growth? Or?
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. When you look at room night demand growth, just levels of occupancies in general, York County is outpacing both the city and James City County. And when if you use weather, consumer confidence,
Right, they had the same rainfall in June that City had and James City had. They also have a kind of an interesting balance between traditional hotel and B&B rooms and timeshare that James City County has. So really, I think, and again, I haven't been able to dig into this deeply since we received this data set, but there continues to be real power in the bypass road area. I think some of it is just that there are so many properties right next to each other. They're giving consumers, that choice in that one kind of concentrated area. There's been some remodel that has happened here in that particular area. They're also situated nicely with a combination of food as well as a hotel right there in close proximity to each other. You've got things like Pirates Cove and Dairy Queen, and then you've got, restaurants, and then you've got the hotels just sort of lined right up there. So I don't have an exact answer as to why they're outperforming. On behalf of the destination, I'm pleased by that outperformance, clearly, but I do also have that same feeling that I'm sure you all have, which is, wow, what is the secret to their success? Why is that so much more pronounced in terms of the average daily rate and in the actual occupancy. There does not appear, in my talking to some of the proprietors there, it does not appear as if they're doing any additional marketing of their properties that's not happening in the city or James City, so that really can't account for it. So some of it might be product development along that area, and as I said, we also think that because it's in close proximity to other things that visitors would want to be doing, like dining out and so forth, right next door, that it's become a popular place for people to decide to stay. They don't have an undue advantage in regard to sports. When we look at the sports marketing tallies, I mean, those room nights are all over the destination. They're in the city, James City, and York. So that is primarily the leisure travel, summer traveler, who is, whatever reason, gravitating more to those properties that are just concentrated in that area.
Thank you. In here, you also talk about consumer confidence and uncertainty being down. Is that something you track from the...
We do. Actually, the August report just came up showing that consumer confidence just buoyed back up a little bit from a dip in July. So we'll be taking a look at that. It looked like it went up about 4 points. Overall, a lot of the trends in the data that we read say that as confidence is going up in terms of employment and buying power, which is what that score index primarily measures, the other piece right now is, in fact, the national election. So there's a lot of skittishness. There's a little bit of uncertainty. Again, speaking on behalf of the Tourism Alliance and looking at the investment we're making at Fall Arts and Harvest Celebration and Christmas, we certainly hope that that skittishness does not lead to people staying home and not coming to Williamsburg, in the next couple of months leading up to that election. So we'll be watching that very carefully, but it does seem as if people are, again, just being a little bit more anxious until they understand what's happening with that national election in November. So, but the consumer confidence scores did just start to go back up, which usually tends to help our destination.
Yeah, I noticed because I went on and looked because I think June, July, and August both saw some increases there. So it's becoming some of the highest in over 12 months. That'll bode well going into the future. But I think you're right.
Yes.
The presidential election will. Who knows what's going to
Just don't go down that path.
I'll stop. And so I don't have a question, just maybe a comment for council. For years, the city has contributed far more dollars into tourism promotion than some of our neighboring counties. And we could always justify that because we had more hotel rooms and we did more sales. But I think we're seeing the turn now. Just look at York County, they've surpassed us in room sales and room nights. I say that only because I think it's something we ought to consider as we move forward.
Yeah, I'm all good. Yeah, thank you.
And Ms. Reardon, if I could just, at the risk of putting words in your mouth, maybe I could ask you to clarify something. When Mr. Pons asked the question about room night demand growth, you said you were happy that York County was outpacing the city in James City County,
Well,
but
I
think you meant that because
York County is outperforming what would have been expected, so it's driving up the metric scorecard for the entire region. I'm certainly not happy that one municipality is doing better than another.
I just want to make sure you could clarify that.
Absolutely not.
And we realize that you represent all three jurisdictions in the entire destination, and so that's where your efforts are focused on. But anything you could do to help us understand in the future what dynamics might be at play that impact specifically the city, I think we would appreciate knowing that, particularly in light of the fact that when the next set of numbers come out, our hotel room numbers will be even lower, and they'll continue to go down as more properties come offline. The more effective utilization of the rooms that we have is going to become increasingly important.
I think, again, I'd be happy to continue to have that conversation. I hope we can comment knowledgeably during the GIO sessions. I think that it's time to take a full look at the entire marketing picture. If you want to harken back to my Marketing 101 days in college, marketing is 4 Ps, and promotion is just one of them. Place is another. Price is another, but the biggest one is product. And the product that you're delivering in marketing is central to price and place and then how you promote it. And so product innovation, what we're doing to attract product, and I mean all tourism product, not just hotel stock, but restaurants. Again, I think the Alliance would love to continue to be a major support to economic development here in the city, to be looking at what are the kinds of things we could be doing in culinary, in sports, in other tourism efforts and products, like the Williamsburg Tasting Trail is a product. That is a new product that we didn't have a year ago. And I think those are exciting new products that we need to keep looking at, because that's, again, what gives us some new energy, some new dynamism, something new for editors to write about, but more importantly, something new for visitors to say, oh, last time I was here, they didn't have that. I want to go down there and see that, or I want to go up there and see that. So I think having a conversation about product innovation as well as the marketing of product is going to be really, really important going forward in the next year. As you said, as the actual physical number of lodging stock that the city has decreases, not increases. That doesn't have to be a negative. That can be a positive. We just need to figure out the strategic plan to make that a positive thing, not a negative thing.
And I don't expect an answer on this because it's a question that may require going back and looking at other information, but do we ever track what happens every 4 years when there's a federal or presidential election cycle, and there's also a Summer Olympics that happens at the same time? Is there a distraction factor there among the traveling public that you can see when you look over a longer period of time, 20, 25 years? It'd be interesting to know that. I know every election is different, and this one, I'm sure people think this one's going to be the most different we've ever
Said the
had.
last one was for the records books, and now they're saying this one will be for the record books.
So there's always something going on in a presidential election that gets people interested, sometimes anxious. So just, if you could maybe get us some information on that.
Absolutely happy to look into that and come back to you on that.
It might help us plan
Yeah.
for the next election 4 years.
Absolutely. And I don't think we've ever really tackled the issue of the Summer Olympics. So again, we know when those are, and we could look at those data points. I think going forward, we could probably do a better job of sort of seeing if there's any correlation to that as well.
Perhaps we should bid on the next summer.
And we could put it in our new indoor sports complex. Yeah. Any other questions from Ms. Reardon? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
It's the same summer.
This takes us to our third background presentation discussion, City Council staff discussions on prospective 2017-18 goals, initiatives, and outcomes. Mr. Collins?
I will keep this brief tonight. For the GIO process, I would just like to remind the public that City Council will have its council retreat for the GIO process this Saturday at 9 a.m. here at the Stryker Center on September 10th. And the community input meeting for the GIO session, or for the GIOs, or the strategic planning document for City Council for the next 2-year period, is Tuesday evening at 7 p.m., September 13th at the community building. The city will be using the preference survey to solicit response from the community on what's important to them looking forward, as well as idea trees to solicit new ideas and thoughts on how the city should move forward. The city's also excited about a new form of digital participation moving beyond that meeting, using a product from Peak Democracy Open Town Hall that will be able to actually mimic a lot of the participatory exercises from the community meeting, so people will digitally be able to participate up to a couple weeks after and get their input. And we look forward to using that product in other processes for the city moving forward. To replace out the Speak Up Williamsburg product that we've used in the past. And with that, that's all I had tonight on the GIO process.
How, for people who are interested in participating remotely through the Peak Democracy Town Hall product, how would they go about doing that? Or how will we communicate that information to the public about how to do that?
How will they do that, IT Director?
Thank you, Mr. City Manager. Mr. Mayor, there will be, you will sign into it or register for it using your email address. In terms of marketing and getting that out, we use all of our normal traditional ways in which we do that, be it the website, email blasts, social media, what have you. There could potentially be a campaign at the community building meeting that evening to kind of get people interested in and get them to sign up there as well.
So we will be pushing that information out.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Is that it?
Sir.
That takes us to the fourth background presentation discussion, the draft downtown parking study presentation. We have John Dorsett from Walker Parking Consultants, but before that, it looks like we have Carolyn Murphy.
Sure do. Mayor Freiling and members of councils, one of the current GIOs is for a parking program review of the downtown area. The last downtown parking study was performed by Desmond Associates in 1995. The city issued an RFP last October and received proposals from 5 consultants. The RFP tasked the consultant with developing a parking master plan for the next 10 years that will meet the needs of visitors, downtown merchants and employees, city residents, the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation, and the college. The stated goal is to develop an exceptional downtown parking system and to make public investments that promise an economic return and support private investment in the downtown area. After interviewing the top 3 candidates, Walker Parking Consultants was chosen as the top firm. Walker is one of the largest parking consulting and parking design firms in the world. They have completed nearly 250 municipal parking studies nationally in the past 5 years. In 2013, Walker completed the College of William & Mary's Parking and Transportation Study. The downtown parking study is being presented today by John Dorsett, Senior Vice President of Walker Parking Consultants. The study is posted on the city's website for public comment. Staff would recommend that the parking study be forwarded to Planning Commission and EDA for review and comment. After review by Planning Commission and EDA, staff would like to return with recommendations on implementation with a likely time frame of January-February 2017. With that, I would like to turn it over to John Dorsett to present the study.
Welcome, Mr. Dorsett.
Thank you, Carolyn. Mayor, City Council, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for having me to present. Again, I'm John Dorsett, representing Walker Parking Consultants. You have a copy of the report, so you know how much material is there. I'm going to try to keep the presentation short and cover the high points. That must have been the wrong button. Okay, here we go. So I have a few introductory comments, and then I'd like to talk about the 3 primary tasks that we dug into, the parking supply-demand conditions, both current and future, and then we also looked at parking policies and practices, and finally we looked at the physical numbers of spaces and ways to get additional capacity. So first, just introduction-wise, we started our work in February of this year. And so during February and March, we were engaged in field data collection. We met with stakeholders. There was an online survey that many of you likely participated in. And then we were out documenting the numbers of spaces and the usage of those spaces. We came back during the month of July and performed another parking occupancy study. So during the summer, we focused on our analysis, which again, parking supply demand, parking policies and practices, and the parking alternatives analysis. And then last month I was here to present to city staff, and then tonight I'm here to present to the mayor and council. Our purpose of the study is to support economic development. And so we have quite a few recommendations for your consideration. And downtown Williamsburg is thriving. It's continuing to grow, and we want to see it continue to grow. As Carolyn mentioned, the last parking plan was developed in 1995, and so 21 years later, it's really time to update that plan. And a parking master plan is needed, not to sit on a shelf, but it's really needed to help meet visitor and stakeholder parking needs. The parking plan should also support and not be contrary to the comprehensive plan, which is dated January of 2013. And the comprehensive plan promotes multimodal transportation means, such as transit, bicycle, pedestrian movements. And so the parking plan that we've created has been very mindful of the overall goals of the comprehensive plan. And one of those goals, again, is stated to improve and expand the bicycle and pedestrian facilities. We did listen to what the stakeholders had to say. We took quite a few notes on that, and those notes will be included as an appendix to the parking plan document. Some of the things that we heard from representatives of the foundation, downtown merchants, representatives of the college, William and Mary, the local churches, individual citizens at large. We heard that short-term parking spaces, primarily on-street spaces, and some of the spaces in the Colonial Williamsburg lots are being used by long-term dwellers. There is some cruising for parking spaces within the downtown. People perceive that they have to watch the clock to avoid getting a parking ticket. There's a perception of maybe not being enough parking spaces in the downtown. A couple people mentioned a lack of insufficient handicap parking, poor lighting in some of the lots, the poor condition of some of the surface parking lots, inconsistent parking enforcement. People complain about car door dings, and also, and this is surprising, we don't usually hear this in most communities, but there is concern that there's no parking rate strategy. And specifically what was mentioned is that there's parking charge at the Prince George garage, but yet I can park free on street. And I'll get into that some more here in a little bit. Some of the best aspects of the downtown parking system were also identified during this intake session. Included are, parking is free and available, but not necessarily convenient. Garage parking is almost always available. And that really includes the variety and number of parking options. And then the downtown, it's very walkable, and you've already done a lot to promote alternative transportation modes. The downtown, it's our observation that it's very walkable. I've been here several times. I stayed at the Williamsburg Lodge, and I typically walk from my hotel to the downtown. Consider that to be very walkable. Another example is within your, there's a 1,320-foot walk, which is about a 5-minute. That's about 1/4 of a mile. So you can see from either the community building, the art museum, you can cover your entire downtown from one of those two places. So most of the parking facilities are, within easy access. And just by comparison, you're all probably familiar with the Patrick Henry Mall. So if you enter at the, northwest corner of the mall, down where the Forever 21 anchor's located, and you walk down to JCPenney, that's about a 5-minute walk. So, compared to what it's like to walk in your downtown, most people wouldn't think twice about this kind of walk. And when you add where they parked to get to the mall entrance, they're actually walking further than what's shown here. So again, you have a very, very walkable downtown. Some of the key findings of the parking supply-demand study, our study area was essentially the railroad tracks to the north, Nassau to the east, Mimosa Lane to the south, a combination of Boundary and Richmond streets to the west. So we're sandwiched between Colonial Williamsburg and the college. It's about a 25-block area, and it also included the Governor's Inn, which is north of the railroad tracks, and the Colonial Williamsburg employee parking lot, which is at the northeast corner of Nassau and Newport. Within that area, that 25-block area, we counted about 4,300 parking spaces. And we separated or segmented that supply by on-street parking, publicly available off-street parking, and privately available off-street parking. So your private parking, that would tend to be the parking owned by, maybe some of the local churches, maybe an employee parking lot owned by the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation. That's what we're talking about when we say private. It's privately available. Public parking would be available to the general public. So it's either on-street, publicly available parking, or off-street. So all the Colonial Williamsburg lots, the P2 lot, the P3, P4, P5, P6, those are all publicly available. Obviously, the Prince George Garage is publicly available. So about 56% of the total supply is privately available, and the reciprocal, or 44%, is publicly available spaces. About 13% of the total supply is on street. And that's typically, and the on-street spaces are the most highly visible. And so when people drive down the street, that's what they see, that's what they remember in terms of whether they believe there's parking space availability or not. You want your on-street parking to typically be used by your short-term dwellers. We counted the spaces, and then we also studied the usage of those spaces. And we interviewed city staff, we interviewed representatives of the foundation, and collectively we agreed that we would do a count in March, and March is considered to be a pretty busy time here. And then we also were asked to come back in July when you have the summertime crowd here, which is another busy time for you. And we counted cars both on weekday and weekend day. So we were out here on Saturdays. And then I think we're out here during the middle of the week, like a Tuesday, Wednesday. We did counts at 10 in the morning and 2 and 7 p.m. So we got a nighttime count. We also have an afternoon count. What we found was March was busier. We purposely counted a week when William and Mary were in session. So it would have been a week when we would be getting traffic for the tourist trade here in Williamsburg, but you still had the college students and college faculty and staff present in Williamsburg. So we counted between 2,500 and 3,000 parked cars in March and at 2 p.m., and that was considered to be the peak. And then when we came back in July, we counted less than 2,000 parked cars. And again, remember, there are 4,300 spaces in the downtown. And weekends were slower than weekdays. So the peak, this is March here that we're showing, and again, 4,326 spaces. There were 1,656 vacant parking spaces during the busiest hour, which was 2 p.m. So you had a 38% vacancy rate. And the photos to the right in both the parking terrace and the Prince George Garage show that in the roof levels of those two facilities, there was, barely anyone up there. And I would say that's pretty typical. I mean, I think I've been here, every time I've been here, it's been like this. And that's been corroborated by a lot of the comments that we've heard from the different stakeholders. On the weekend, we have even lower parking occupancy. And that's shown here. And what we're showing here in terms of a figure is this is a heat map, and so as the parking occupancy gets higher, then we get hotter. So that's shown with the red color. So 85 to 100% occupancy is shown in red, and we have a couple blocks where occupancy is high, and orange is not quite as warm, but it's 70 to 84%. And then yellow and green are the least occupied areas. And what we're showing here is privately available this is all off-street, privately available spaces. So it shows an abundance of parking on a weekday, and this would be in March. When we look at off-street spaces that are publicly available, then we have a different story. And you notice there's 4 blocks in the center of the map, and they're all red, where those are the foundation lots, the P2, P3, P4, and P5 lots. And so they're all trending at between 85 and 100% occupancy. So they tend to stay full often, and I think that tends to stick with people. And then there are also on-street parking along Richmond Avenue and in the blocks near the Merchant Square. Those are near capacity. And during a weekend, we're not showing any red and very little orange here. So obviously the weekend has more in the way of available parking. And then for publicly available parking on the weekend, again, we have the 4 blocks, which is where the Colonial Williamsburg visitor parking is, and those lots are near capacity. We also looked at future parking demand, and we worked with the planning department, and the planning department provided information that fed the table that's shown on the right-hand side of this graph. So we have a number of proposed development projects, and so Walker, based on industry standards, we computed what we thought the parking demand would be for these proposed development projects. And we layered that on top of a March 2 p.m. peak condition, which is what we observed. And so we're anticipating that if we're at a 62% occupancy during typical peak conditions now with these future development projects, as well as an allowance for some background growth, we're thinking that in 10 years, your parking occupancy will get to about 75%. So you'll still have about a 25% vacancy factor. So to summarize the parking supply demand study, there are plenty of unused parking spaces. They may not be where people would like for them to be, though, and so that's what we're going to try to address in the parking policies and practices recommendations part of the plan. People typically want to park at the doorstep. Unfortunately, that's not a realistic expectation, so we need to try to identify ways to, help address people's desires. There are hot spots, again, around the Colonial Williamsburg lots, the P2, P3, 4, and 5 that I mentioned, and also the on-street spaces within the center of the downtown. Again, weekday was busier than weekends. March is busier than July. But in summary, you have about 1,600 unused spaces on a typical busy day. And we expect that number will remain at 1,000, 10 years out. So in terms of your parking policies and practices, the goals, we want parking to be easily understood. We want it to embrace technology. There's a lot of technologies out there. The signage to the right is something that's used here locally. And this is the parking deck at the college, William and Mary, where they're actually showing the number of spaces available per level. And this is a great way to advertise to people what the space availabilities are. Sometimes when you drive past a parking garage, you can't really see inside of it. And so this signage tends to help you advertise what the availability is inside the garage. We want the signage to be clear and understandable, and we want to manage the availability of both on and off-street parking. The current conditions, the ownership and management of the parking is fragmented. You have the foundation owning and managing its parking spaces. You have the city controlling the on-street parking, the city running the Prince George Street garage and the parking terrace. And then you have the college in that town and gown relationship. So there are a lot of different, and then you have the private sector. You know, you have private businesses and private entities that are owning and controlling their own parking. So what we're envisioning or promoting is that strategy be coordinated, and we're recommending that the city approach the foundation and see if they would be agreeable to maybe the city taking over the maintenance of their lots and the management of those parking facilities. And obviously that would have to be a mutually agreeable win-win for the foundation and the city. But you know, we're hopeful that an arrangement like that could perhaps be met. The maintenance on some facilities has been deferred. There's a photograph here that I think represents what's going on out there in a number of the lots. I believe this is lot P4 with the foundation lot. They had representatives that we met with that admitted that repairs and maintenance had not gotten some of the attention they had hoped. The signage, I think, works pretty good in terms of identifying the available spaces. However, you know, we wonder if the public knows that it's general public parking. I mentioned the parking rate strategy earlier. One thing that we think would be beneficial is if there could be a single source responsibility center to run the parking in the downtown, to coordinate the on versus off street parking rates. You know, that's very important. And right now you can park, as you know, you can park free on street. Then if you want to park in the garage, you know, you have to pay. I think your garage rates are reasonable. You've been charging those rates since the garage opened. And we would recommend that you keep those rates, you know, where they're at now. But we think that, you know, you should consider requiring parkers to pay to park on street. We also recommend an auxiliary fund, and that fund could be used to provide financial strength to the parking system, and that could be used to generate a fund of money that could be used to care for the maintenance of your parking facilities, to improve communications with the different stakeholder groups. Here's some illustrations or photos of a number of the parking facilities. We know you're doing repair work currently on the terrace. There's also water standing. I think that's the P6 lot. Like it was fairly underwater. This was taken about a month ago in August. And there was also ponding observed in a number of the other surface lots. I think these are lots that are owned by the foundation. So with the program that we're recommending here, we would you know, make these improvements so that, you know, you wouldn't have these issues. We do recommend that the city install smart parking meters, and these run based on solar power. They're manageable from a central location. They also offer credit card acceptance, which is a convenient way for many people to pay. We're not, Walker's vendor neutral. We're not recommending any specific manufacturer. We're not even recommending a kiosk versus a single space meter. We can share with you what the pros and cons are of those different types, and we've reported on that in the appendix to our report. I won't cover those details here, but there's a number of manufacturers out there, and the cost structure, both on the capital side and the operating side, is competitive. And many cities have gone before you, so you're not testing technology that's new. You're testing something that's been tried and true. And so we would recommend this technology. And then you can add pay by cell as an option, really at no cost to the city. That what they do is they pass that cost along to the user of the parking, who opts to pay by cell phone. And that pay by cell surcharge is about a 35-cent addition per transaction. And a number of communities have really embraced this pay-by-cell. I know some of you have probably seen it in other cities. But it allows someone, maybe you're out to dinner and, you fed the meter for 2 hours and, you're coming up on your 2-hour limit. You don't want to get a parking ticket. Well, the pay-by-cell would allow you to add maybe an hour to your stay, from the table of your dining room. And, a lot of people really enjoy that convenience and, don't mind paying for parking if it can be made convenient. We are recommending that the current paid parking program be expanded. The first column shows the duration of stay, and then the subsequent columns show the proposed rates that we're suggesting. The second column, entitled Parking Structures, is your current rate schedule. So these are the rates that are being charged right now in the Prince George Street Garage for transient parkers. So for 1 hour, I pay $1, and then it's $12 for the daily maximum. For lots P2 through P6 and the library lot, we're suggesting that those be the same rates that are currently being charged in the Prince George Garage. And then for on-street, we're suggesting a rate of $1.50 an hour. And for the second hour, it would be another $1.50, or a total charge of $3. And then if someone wants to stay for a third hour or beyond, then we're suggesting that the rates escalate, because really we want the on-street parking to be used by short-term dwellers, not long-term dwellers. So while you could, park longer than 2 hours on the street, if you want to park for that third hour, then we would suggest that third hour costs $3. So for a 3-hour length of stay, we're looking at a $6 total rate. And so there's a markable difference between, an all-day stay on street versus an all-day stay in the garage, and that's what we want. And that's what, we're talking about, trying to manage the different rate strategies between your on-street facilities and your off-street facilities. That all needs to be coordinated. And the benefit of coordinating these rates is it'll push people out. It'll drive employees off of the on-street spaces. It'll drive long-term parkers off of the on-street spaces. And it'll open up some of the on-street spaces, and it'll open up some of the foundation-owned lots, make more of that parking available for short-term dwellers. And that's the whole goal here. We want to push people a little further out, get some people, not everyone, but we want to get some people to walk just a little bit further. And we want to get better usage of the Prince George Garage. And we want to get better usage of the terrace. And we want to get better usage of the Colonial Williamsburg employee parking lot and lot P6, much of which is going unused.
Because I don't know, the Colonial Williamsburg employee lot is free for its employees.
Yes.
Sticker. But what you're finding is a lot of them park not there but on street?
I believe so, yes. We also noticed that you have a graduated fine schedule for parking citations, and what that means is that the more times you get caught doing something you're not supposed to be doing, the more you have to pay. So that's good, so kudos to you for really implementing a best practice. What we would recommend, though, in addition to that, is we think you need to step up the amount of the penalty, because at $10, that's not enough to discourage someone from trying to game the system. At the same time, you want to be friendly to visitors and tourists. So we thought, for your consideration, that maybe on the first violation, you might want to issue a warning. And then the second time, then hit them with a $35 fine for overtime parking. And, if they do it 4 times, then go after them with a $100 fine. But we think jumping from $10 to $35 and giving the warnings is a pretty good balance between, it's a pretty good compromise. And then also consistent with that is this notion of a parking ambassador, and this is a photograph of an ambassador in the city of Grand Rapids, Michigan. They run around on these segways, and they give people directions. They're out there, they're friendly people. They're trying to promote the downtown. They're not personifying, an angry demeanor, trying to catch everyone. And they're out and about, and they're trying to be goodwill ambassadors for the downtown. A number of other cities have adopted this program. I think the warning on the first ticket goes a long way to helping these people do a good job. And we want to be a friendly community. Not that your current people aren't friendly, but we think you can take it a notch higher with this. We also heard from a number of the employees that they don't want to walk to the foundation employee parking lot at night. There's some safety concerns. And so to counter that, we thought that there should be a safe walker chaperone program, and this is something that the ambassador group could also probably help with. We've seen this addressed at a number of colleges and universities. College of William and Mary is doing this now, as we understand. We looked at a number of options to expand the parking capacity, and a lot of that information is included in the appendix to the report. I'm not going to cover that in detail here. We're not recommending a parking garage. We don't think you need that at this time. And that's really the most expensive form of a solution. And you could build a garage today and it wouldn't take care of all your problems. People would still say, well, it's not where I want it to be. So we're not recommending that. A parking garage would probably cost, on the order of $5 to $10 million, depending on the location and the capacity. So instead, we looked at reconfiguring a number of the existing surface lots, and there is some opportunity to gain spaces by restriping and rebuilding the lot. A number of the lots need to be rebuilt anyway. So it's a good opportunity to take advantage of some of those options at a much lower capital investment. So this is an example here, a lot P3, and we understand that there's been some discussion about taking that lot out of commission, and we actually included that in our analysis, assuming that you would do that. So the 1,000 space 10-year vacancy that we mentioned assumed that you would remove this lot out of commission. But in case you didn't, it can be reconfigured to gain. I think we were able to pick up another 19 spaces just through a more efficient layout, and that's illustrated in the diagram here. So the summary here, we looked at reconfiguring lots P3 and P6. If you reconfigure lot P6, we think you can pick up another 32 spaces. You can do that and rebuild the lot for right under $1 million. We looked at parking garages on P6, the foundation employee lot, churches, including Williamsburg Baptist, and then the police department, library lot, and again, the parking structures we're looking at about $5 to $7 million, depending on the capacity and location and whatnot. So that was best I could do to try to condense this, 150 plus page report. I've tried to cover the high points. I'm sure you have questions. So please fire away.
I get to go first?
You do. You're anxiously awaiting.
All right, so this is Carolyn, we said the last study was in 1995. So this is a refreshing analysis because, like you, we often hear no parking downtown. It's so hard to park downtown. It's especially hard to park downtown on the weekends. All this information runs counter to that. Even from a business location perspective, unless you're in the food and beverage industry, people sometimes advise against locating downtown above some of Colonial Williamsburg's retail space. So this is a whole lot of data. It runs counter to so much local lore, if you will. And I'm really interested to see what planning does with this, how staff comes out. The fact that there's 38% vacancy at peak hours, and that given your estimates, we're going to have plenty of parking supply for an extended period of time, that really shakes things up. We're different than a lot of downtowns because the college is so close, and they really rely on us for some supply of parking. So particularly the Richmond Road, Jamestown Road corridors are going to be an interesting discussion with regard to feed parking, because classes vary depending on whether it's a Monday, Wednesday, Friday class. You can probably get it in that $3 window, but Tuesday, Thursdays, it's $6 to park. Changes the dynamic. This is really exciting. I appreciate all your hard work and look forward to the discussion.
Well, and I want to thank you as well for everything that's included in the parking study, and I think it's very wise to let the planning department and EDA go at it in fine detail and then come back. I just had a couple questions, and I don't know if you know this, but the study that was done in 1995, was anything implemented from that study?
No, it's sit on the shelf, basically.
Okay, was there anything, remarkable that came out of that?
It was very similar to this, the outcomes.
So this time we might get some bang for the buck, so to speak. And then as far as private parking, I know you mentioned the Williamsburg Baptist Church, and that their spaces are included in your overall figure, correct?
Yes, the 4,300 number for our study area does include those spaces, but we did segment it, though, between public and private. So if you just want to focus on public, you can look at that number in isolation.
And the 1,000 plus that you would have after a certain amount of growth and stuff still includes those ones from the Williamsburg Baptist Church?
Yes.
And I guess it would be a topic of discussion to see what their views are on using that parking space for more than Sunday worship.
Yes. And additionally, we would recommend that the city engage private landlords to make their parking available to the general public. We've seen, and there's actually something in the appendix of the report that addresses that. We've seen a number of cities that have been able to strike agreements with private landlords that, including churches, and they make their spaces available, and that can go a long way to deferring the need to, build structured parking.
Empty.
Yeah, exactly, right.
And then from your experience, when you have fees that are parking tickets and then the extra increase after a warning or a notice has been given, how enforceable and what's the return on that? For instance, tourist comes here and they get a parking ticket, and you send them a notice, and now the fine is, let's say, $100. Is the attitude, well, I'm not going back there for a while, I'm not going to worry about it, or do they really recognize that as a deterrent for parking? I mean, I've gotten wheel locked a couple places, and I've gotten towed, so, to me, those are real deterrents. But,
apparently didn't deter you.
Yeah, well, I paid them all up. So I was just curious about that. So,
No, it's a great question. For people who are bringing their own cars, it might be a challenge to go after out-of-state people. There's probably a way to go after people who are in-state. I know that there might be a way for people who rent cars, but I don't know how many of those you have here. But there might be a way to go after people who rent cars to get your local car rental companies to put that in their rental car agreement. I remember once I went to Washington, D.C., and one of the cameras got me for speeding. I didn't even know I was speeding.
Yeah.
But I couldn't fight the ticket because I signed on the fine print on my rental car agreement said I had to pay any traffic violations. So but it would be the same thing, I think, with parking.
Just a question.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you for presenting this, and I look forward to digging into it a lot more. As I think Marvin printed it out, it's about an inch thick. I'm not going to print mine. But, one of the things that jumps out at me is the chart, I guess on page 16, where it shows the difference between March and July, weekday and weekend. For me, March is obviously what I get out of this. March is when the students are in town, and so they're filling that space in the students. They're not here in July, so that creates a lot of available spaces. And then you look at the difference between weekday and weekend. In both March and July, it's busier midweek, which is a lot of the employees that work in that area. So, maybe that's not a bad thing because they do bring an economy with them. When they do go to work at the foundation, they are shopping, or if they're working at a restaurant, maybe they stop at another restaurant. And so there's an economy and there's some benefit to that. So how do we tweak that to make available those prime spots, I guess that's in the overall plan, so that there is a way to show that there's a benefit to parking somewhere else rather than penalizing them for parking close. I think that there's a real science to that. So I look forward, again, hopefully that's in all of this discussion. And it comes full circle back to the tourism discussion about being a drive destination. We are a drive destination, and so how do we remain sensitive to the fact that people who come to Williamsburg are in their cars? They didn't fly in, they're not in a taxi, not all staying in the hotels within walking distance. So people got to drive into this area. So I think we have to be sensitive to that. But I do believe you're right on target with one of your first pictures about signage. What does P6 really mean? It doesn't say it's free. It doesn't say it's whatever it needs to say. It should be more information there. So again, I look forward to digging into this a little bit more. I may have another question, but I'll let Benny go next.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
Ms. Dorsett, and thank you so much for this, and pass along my compliments, please, to Ms. Gardo and also the rest of the Walker Parking Consultants. Just had a few observations based on your plan. It was very comprehensive, so thank you so much for the presentation. I think this is one of those plans that was highly anticipated, given some of the points that other council members have made so far. I think the idea of a master plan is intriguing. And it's within the best interest of the city to pursue, especially when I was looking through the modernizing the parking equipment. I think that was a great recommendation. And also to note from Ms. Ramsey's question about having the 1995 master parking study kind of just sitting there, hopefully what we can see is a dynamic document that just keeps being added and changed throughout our GIOs and comp plan process. And I don't know how planning staff or the city manager plans to go along with this, but be really curious to see how these policies and whatever we see with the master plan is either complementing or integrated with our comp plan process that's coming up in 2018, I believe. Just another point as well, during the campaign, when I was around campus and speaking to faculty as well, one of the biggest number one concerns that I heard throughout the campaign was parking. And I think that was surprising to see in this parking study that suggests otherwise. And there might be several reasons for that. Maybe students don't want to pay the $150 to $200+ parking fee in order to park on campus. And maybe because there's so limited space in terms of just restrictions, whether there's faculty or staff or the president or the student being able to park in certain parts of campus that lead them to want to park in the downtown area or in our neighborhoods. So it gave me a deeper appreciation of kind of looking through this study that's not just tied with the econ development, but also tied with town-gown relations as well. And something that I just wanted to remind council is that as we deliberate on certain policies, we have to also bear in mind some of the consequences and avoid striking a fine balance with our town-gown relations, because from what I understand, we have people, faculty or students or anyone parking in our neighborhoods, and that has been a consistent problem through the years. So hopefully that's something that we'll consider in our master parking plan. So I don't know what direction y'all are going to take it, but just a thing to bear in mind. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dorsett. Appreciate a lot of work that went into this, looking at facilities we have, the demand on those facilities. I am curious about one point you mentioned a little bit earlier on when you talked about the potential growth in parking and some events that could occur, some economic developments. I guess I'm looking at page 23. One of those is the art museum expansion. When you were calculating that as an impact on parking, are you calculating both the additional demand that would create and the loss of parking because the expansion would take place in a lot?
Yes, correct.
When I hear the 38% vacancy rate and I see that we're using lot 44, which is that Colonial Williamsburg employee lot at the corner of Nassau and Newport, I just can't help but think of William and Mary's approach to parking and how they have adequate parking for all their demand. They have more than enough parking spaces. The problem is a huge chunk of it is at William and Mary Hall, and nobody wants to park there. So it pushes. So even though the spaces are there, there's not enough incentive or deterrent to get people to go there. So I worry that we could fall into the same challenge if we look at that lot as really practical and available inventory. I'm not discounting it. I just want to mention that I find it hard to imagine a lot of people are going to want to park there and then walk over to the Blue Talon or to Aromas or that part of Merchant Square. And I appreciate the circles and the distance, and but I also have this feeling people anymore don't expect to have to do that, and maybe that's the environment we've created.
Well, yeah, I think you're correct. One of the things that we observed is it was curious how many on-street spaces and how many core parking lot spaces. I'm talking about P2, P3, P4, P5. Right there at the core, right in Merchant Square. How many of those spaces were fully occupied or near full capacity by 10 in the morning? The stores, they're just opening at 10, so how could we already be, at capacity or near capacity? And the only explanation for that is, well, it's not short-term customer parking, it's other longer-term dwellers who are occupying a number of these spaces. So I think we want to try to push those people out, and then if you're going to the Blue Talon, you can easily find somewhere that doesn't require much of a walk.
Showed us the sign of the William and Mary parking garage, which you see more and more places. The parking they have up at Tyson's Corner now, it's terrific, where you can look down a row of parking and they have a little light above each space, so you can look down and see if there's a green light. There's an empty space. You don't have to drive up and down. And I'm not suggesting we go that far, but knowing that there's spaces in the structure is incredibly helpful. In your recommendations or study, do you talk about a broader way of communicating available parking to people? Or is there the capability to, not this when you're driving, but go on your phone, look at an app, and identify where the parking spaces are in a certain area?
Yes, that technology exists. Actually, on your Williamsburg app, there's a parking section, and there's actually a connection to ParkMe. It's not active, but the technology exists that would allow people to go to that ParkMe portion of the Williamsburg app and see what the parking space availability is. That could be the technology exists for that to happen.
That's the type of access to information that I think would help
Yes.
really alleviate the perception of there's no parking downtown. It's just that it doesn't happen to be where I'm looking at the moment because everybody
Absolutely.
looked in that same spot.
Absolutely.
And we also haven't talked about, and there are a lot of other issues we're going to have to get into, not necessarily today, but things like validation and how we can, for businesses that want to participate in a way that increasingly incents people to come visit them while they're parked downtown. And is that addressed in here?
It is mentioned. You have at least one retail merchant who already validates. I know Barrett's restaurant offers coupons for discounted parking. But that program could be expanded to include other merchants, and the city could, take a role in, administering that program.
And the library is included in the study area?
Yes.
And there's recommendation for charging for parking at the library?
Yes.
I have to think about that
Yes.
for a long time, because what that does to potentially deter public access to the library. But I can appreciate what happens if you don't charge for parking at the library, then all those people who are taking the on-street parking spaces will park at the library. So figuring out how we can...
Validation.
Through checking out a book, sure. And then, are there any revenue estimates that come out of your suggested rates?
That was a question that the city manager had, and we're providing some information on that. It's not included in the report that you have, but we'll be following up with a memo that provides that information.
Because there's you talk about a number of things that would require additional public outlay of expenses, whether
Yes.
it's reconfiguration of lots, maintenance of lots,
Correct.
parking ambassadors, safe travel to and from cars, the metering systems themselves. I mean,
Yeah, the recommendations that we have, we believe they're at least revenue neutral, or you're going to be revenue positive after the expenses. Meters in a downtown like you have, where there's activity and parking space turnover, $1 an hour is kind of the minimum rate that needs to be charged to pay for that ongoing capital and operating expenses. The enforcement tends to pay for itself. And so we're trying to create a parking auxiliary or an enterprise fund that's self-sustaining and doesn't require contributions from the general fund.
that other question?
Well, so I guess one of the things you touched about is the escalation of tickets, pricing, or fines. And I was curious, Mr. City Manager, do we have that technology now? I know in the past it was hard to, if somebody got a second ticket, showed up to pay it, did the clerks who had to collect it know that it was the second ticket, and then there was actually a bump up in fees? I think there was as I last had a conversation about it, there was a disconnect there. Even though we had it.
That would be part of the benefit of a new technology, is not only is it a parking meter, but it also allows for that parking enforcement as well. So there would be better data for the consumer, and also to protect abuse of the system.
So along with this would be a technology upgrade for the city in terms of enforcement, fine collections.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Dorsett. Ms. Murphy, I have a question for you. Early on, you suggested that staff was recommending that this be forwarded to the Planning Commission and the EDA for their consideration, discussion, and recommendation.
Yes, sir.
Are you asking us to do anything to make that happen?
Yes. It would be nice if you would just say that you concur with that so that we could forward that on to Planning Commission and
You can
Economic
formally
Development.
send it. Part of Planning Commission and EDA's role is to be advisory to council. So you can direct this study, acknowledge receipt, and direct the study to those two boards for comment and review. That also allows staff the time to look at an implementation plan in my mind, that comes back to council in the January budget development timeframe to be able to be involved in that process and discussion.
And creates more opportunities for public input.
Definitely,
processes.
definitely.
And would you suggest that we do that simultaneously, EDA and Planning Commission?
Yes.
I think it's imperative.
Thank you.
That's our last background presentation and discussion. City Council communications, this is a time for council to share information
Just
from the various
a little note of interest. As you know, I'm on the Chamber Alliance Board. There's going to be a bylaw amendment recommendation from the Executive Committee to the full board that would change what is now the requirement that half of the board members be either tourism related or business related. And so they've created some wiggle room by saying that you can swing no more than 2 one way or the other. So in fact, now that before it's 12 and 12, now you can do 10 and 14. And the theory is, I think, just the way that the business community is evolving and tourism and other businesses have such an interconnected role that it's hard to define those positions now. So that's a change coming forward from the
Okay, thank you. That takes us to schedule of meetings. Mr. Collins, anything you'd like to point out? You've already mentioned a couple of things coming up.
I've done my mentioning of schedules tonight.
Okay. This takes us to open forum, where anybody in the audience is welcome to come forward and talk to council about any issue. I do have one speaker's card. And that is from Nancy Carter. If you could please come forward, state your name and address, and we ask folks to keep their comments to about 5 minutes or so.
5 minutes. I'm Nancy Carter. I live at 3 Hague Close down in Port Ann, and that puts me about 1.2 miles from Merchant Square area, and I've been very interested in the parking study and its process. And I was a part of a stakeholder meeting, and I was interested to see today's presentation, but it was silent on a topic in which I'm interested in, is that blocks that are dedicated to residential parking that are not being utilized, if at all, or to a minimal extent. So I'll look forward to commenting as we go into this process. I kind of hoped I'd see like a bullet or a slide on that, because there are multiple blocks of residential parking that are no longer utilized, predominantly because the land use pattern has changed. Residential lots have been combined, and whereas there used to be a need for space on the street, there is no longer a need, because the people who combine the lots are able to build garages and off-street parking, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm interested in that because I'm one of the people who's parking by 10 a.m. From time to time. And the predominantly, in my opinion, why there's so many people trying to find a spot by 10 a.m. is because we need to park for longer than 1 or 2 hours. Otherwise, we have to come back and move our car and hunt for a spot again. So the city doesn't seem to have many spaces where you can park for longer than 2 hours, relatively close to Merchant Square. And so you drive past these empty residential blocks, mostly in the blue zone where I live, and then you're hunting for a space. I think if the city could somehow, in its planning, open up those blocks, and you could have an immediate improvement today and get me out of competition with the tourist who wants to spend money in Merchant Square in shops and restaurants. So hopefully more detail on this will be in their full report or as we go forward in the process. I'd also agree with the gentleman's statement about disjoint processes. When these lots were combined together to make larger building lots, I really wish planning or whoever the appropriate authority was could have looked at parking as well. You know, they eliminated their need for on-street parking. Couldn't that have been taken into consideration and modify the city parking plan? Anyway, thank you for listening to me. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anybody else who would like to address council? Seeing none, we'll close the open forum. Anything else? Any closed session?
Mr. Mayor, I move to adjourn.
Second.
Ms. Walton, would you call the roll, please?
Mr. Sang?
Aye.
Mr. Pons?
Aye.
Mayor Freiling?
Aye.
Mayor Foster?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
This meeting is adjourned.